I've been wanting to read a little bit about Miles Davis for a long while, but I found it hard to focus in on something. This is a book called Miles Davis, The Definitive Biography by Ian Carr, and it's very thick. So this is a part of his life where he's been so successful, and then he had a lot of comebacks. He had trouble with his hip, that he needed a lot of surgery on it, and he got all sorts of illnesses, and he went back onto cocaine to try and relieve some of the pain, and sunk into a deep addiction on that, and used to stay in his house with the curtains drawn. And as somebody said, cockroaches running about it, 5-inch long cockroaches, and it was a terrible state. Anyway, this young lady who used to be a partner with him sorted him out for a bit and got back onto the road. Got him back into his house properly. And there was a young saxophonist named his name Bill Evans. It's not the same Bill Evans who played piano. This is a very young fellow, the same name, but he played saxophone. But as I found out later, he also played very good piano, but for the purpose of this, he played saxophone. So Miles had just come out of this terrible deep state where he hadn't played his trumpet for years and was just getting back into it. And he was out doing his first concerts. So this is a little bit about that, and in particular what Bill Evans says about working in the band. In May 1981, Miles Davis felt ready to play in public again and acted with characteristic decisiveness. His old sparring partner, promoter George Wayne, had kept in touch with him intermittently during his reclusive years, and now wanted to book his band for the Newport Festival, which had been transferred from Newport to New York City and renamed the Cool Jazz Festival. Miles agreed to play 2 concerts at the Avery Fisher Hall on the 5th of July for the festival, and said his fee was about $90,000 for the 2 shows, though Wayne later disputed the figure without stating an alternative actual one. During his retirement, Davis had acquired a new manager, Mike Rothbaum, and now asked him to book the band into a small club called Kicks in the Cambridge area of Boston for 4 days at the end of June. This would give the band an opportunity to play itself in, while away from New York and in front of small enthusiastic audiences. Miles now needed a road crew and managed to contact the 2 key people of his old team, Jim Rose and Chris Murphy, both of whom had been driving cabs during his long layoff. Both were glad to hear from Miles, and he said, "When I saw those guys, both with long hair, I just hugged them. I was so glad they had come back." And as if to steady himself for live performance early in June, he went to New York's Village Vanguard and sat in with the Mel Lewis Big Band, playing a blues with a rhythm section for almost 9 minutes. Columbia was so uncertain that Miles would be able to sustain his comeback that they decided to record any public concerts he played with his band. With Mino Sinelu now on percussion, Davis rehearsed the sextet at his house. He was still using his looser improvisatory approach to making music, which would change radically when he eventually got into his full stride. And in those early stages, it unnerved the younger musicians, although Al Foster must have been well used to it. Al Foster was a drummer, I think, an old associate. Bill Evans, saxophonist, recalled, "The band was finally put together and we were rehearsing at Miles's house. But there was no written music. I mean, we never really went over tunes from beginning to end. We were just having a barbecue and hanging out in his backyard. And there was no real rehearsal." And he says, "Okay, well, that's good enough. And we'll go to the gig." We were petrified. We were all on the phone saying, "It's all over. His career's over. Our careers are over. It's never going to work." So from then on we realised that the music was going to be what everybody puts into it, which is, I guess, what he'd done in the past. He trusted everybody's musicianship to create a record, and when it kicked off, it was all right. We could tell that it was happening then, that Al Foster and Marcus Miller were sounding great together. Marcus Miller is the bass player. That Stern, guitarist, fitted in well, and that everything worked. We were excited about it, you know. We didn't realise that we could actually put it onto record on the first gig. The whole saga of Miles Davis's long absence from the scene, with its rumours about motives, his state of health, his intentions, and the various abortive attempts at recording, followed by his slow, halting efforts over 18 months at re-emergence into the public arena, was one of the longest and most potent public relations events in the history of jazz. No public relations firm could ever have artificially created such an event, because it came out of the very real spiritual and physical suffering of the central figure. When Miles was in full creative flow, he knew his own worth, and often had doubts and insecurities about what he was doing. These apparent weaknesses were his great strength and helped to account for the sustained quality of his work. When his creative flow was spent, however, he seemed to feel empty and of little worth. Recalling his reclusive period, Cicely Tyson said, and Cicely Tyson was the one who helped him out of his deep depression. "I remember when he was in hospital one time with a leg problem. I spent every day there and we talked about whether he would play again. He said, 'Well, I don't know if there's anything there.' Miles is a man who produces from his gut. If there is nothing to give, he can't fake it. Like many people categorised as geniuses, he never even knew his own true worth." Yet possibly more than any other jazz musicians, Miles's music had touched the hearts of people all over the world, and his absence was a great deprivation for many of them. Few people knew how physically ill he had been, or had much idea about his psychological condition, and speculation about his return had reached fever pitch months before it became a reality. The letters pages of Downbeat magazine had communications from several continents, some pleading for his return, others accusing him of willfully staying off the scene or suggesting it was his duty to come back. And these views were echoed in music papers and jazz magazines worldwide. When it was clear that he was returning to public performance and had agreed to play at Avery Fisher Hall on the 5th of July, the trickle of publicity became a flood, graduating to major newspapers and the media in general the world over. And both his Avery Fisher Hall concerts were consequently sold out within 2 hours, which pleased Miles and his band greatly. In readiness for the 4 preliminary concerts in Boston, he brought himself a brand new canary yellow Ferrari sports coupe, because he wanted to be seen arriving in the club in it. His earlier Ferraris had always been important stylistic appendages for him, and this one, apart from making him feel good, would also create the impression that his return was ongoing. As he said, a little show business doesn't hurt sometimes. The rest of the band had flown up to Boston, but he drove there with Jim Rose, one of the road managers, in the passenger seat, while Chris Murphy, the other road manager, drove the truck with the equipment. Although he was staying across the street from the club, he intended to drive the car to the entrance of Kicks each night. He was apprehensive about his comeback and would remain nervous before concerts for some time yet, which is why he needed all the psychological props and supports he could find. He told Leonard Feather, "Every time I get ready to play a concert, I get butterflies in my stomach. I can't eat the day before, and everything seems like it aches. Once I'm on stage, the nervousness disappears, and I gather strength while I'm playing." Miles and the band played 2 sets for each of the 4 nights, 26th to the 9th of June, at Kicks. The club, which held 425 people, or about 425 people, was full throughout, and he and his musicians were astonished by the intensity of excitement and the open display of emotion by the audience. Bill Evans, the saxophonist, says, "It was when we did the first concert in Boston when I realised that this guy, this Miles Davis, who was a friend of mine, I know real well, whom I'd been helping through his whole time of a year, was actually the great Miles Davis, the trumpet player of the fascinating Prince of Darkness kind of thing that everybody envisaged him as being." He was a little bit nervous. He'd say, "Well, let's go to the club now." We'd walk in and the people went crazy. Jesus. People wept with joy at seeing him, and his playing moved them. And Miles too recalled one of those nights when a small black man in his mid-30s who had cerebral palsy was sitting in front of the audience in a wheelchair, and Miles played a blues to him. Halfway through my solo, I looked into this guy's eyes, and he was crying. He reached up his withered arm, which was trembling, and with his shaking hand he touched my trumpet, as though he were blessing it and me. Man, I almost lost it right then and there, almost broke down myself and cried. It was almost like he was telling me everything was all right, and that my playing was as beautiful and strong as ever. I needed it right at that moment to go on. I'll probably read some other things about Miles later on, but I like that bit there, his second recovery, and I thought I'd read that first.